The police arrested him without even asking his name. For them, he was just another suspicious black man. But in the courtroom, when he spoke, everyone froze. They had thrown behind bars a man before, whom judges and senators once bowed. What happened next shocked everyone. But let's start from the very beginning. The city of Millbrook was falling asleep. The streets were nearly empty, with only a few late-night pedestrians hurrying home. James Carter stepped out of a 24-hour convenience store, holding a bottle of water and a Snickers bar. He had just finished work and was heading calmly toward his car, parked around the corner. Suddenly, the sharp screech of tires shattered the quiet night. A patrol car, lights flashing, stopped right in front of him. "Hands up! Slowly!" barked a white officer as he stepped out, shining a flashlight directly into James's eyes. "What's going on, officer?" James raised his hands, careful not to make any sudden movements. The second officer had already moved behind him, grabbing his shoulder with one hand while reaching for handcuffs with the other. "You fit the description. Black male, tall, wearing dark clothing." "What description? I just bought some water. Here's the receipt." But his words meant nothing. The officer twisted his arm sharply behind his back. "Relax, or we'll charge you with resisting arrest." The small crowd outside the store fell silent. Someone pulled out a phone and started recording. "You didn't even check his ID," shouted a woman in pajamas, peering out from a nearby window. "Stay out of this, ma'am. It's none of your business," one of the cops snapped, before shoving James toward the patrol car. "I haven't done anything." James's voice was firm, but he knew it was useless. The officers forced him into the car. He could hear bystanders yelling, demanding an explanation, but the cops ignored them. At the station, he was taken straight to an interrogation room. One officer turned on the camera, opened a folder of documents, and looked at him with open disdain. "Let's make this easy. Where were you an hour ago?" "At work. I'm a lawyer." The officers exchanged glances and smirked. "A lawyer? Yeah, sure. We'll sort this out in court." They sent James to a holding cell without even letting him call. 2 days in a cell felt like an eternity. James had not been allowed a single phone call or seen a lawyer. When the day of the trial finally arrived, they led him out in handcuffs, as if he were a criminal. The courtroom was already packed. Journalists, local activists, and outraged citizens who had seen the video of his arrest. The officers who had arrested him stood off to the side, confident that everything would go as usual. Charges, a guilty plea, case closed. "Case of the state versus James Carter," the court clerk announced. The judge, an elderly white man, tapped his gavel. "Prosecution, state your charges." The prosecutor, a smug young man, stood up. "Your Honor, the defendant was detained under suspicious circumstances. He refused to provide identification and displayed hostility toward officers. We believe he had reasons to conceal his identity." James clenched his fists but remained calm. "Mr. Carter," the judge addressed him, "confirm your identity. Why didn't you have identification?" James stood, locking eyes first with the prosecutor, then with the two officers, before slowly turning to the judge. "My name is James Andrew Carter. I am a retired federal judge." Silence fell over the courtroom. The prosecutor blinked, his confidence evaporating. "What?" The officer stood frozen. "I worked in the judicial system for 25 years. My credentials were turned in upon retirement. I never concealed my identity. But these officers never even asked. They assumed I was a criminal simply because I am black." Murmurs of outrage rippled through the courtroom. The judge paled. "You? A judge?" James's attorney handed the judge a folder. "Here is his biography, his service records. Everything is official." The judge skimmed through the documents, then set them down and turned to the officers. "All charges against Mr. Carter are dropped. An internal investigation into the conduct of these officers is now underway." The courtroom buzzed with voices. The officers took a step back, realizing they had just destroyed their own careers. James removed his handcuffs and slowly turned to face them. You thought I was just another suspicious man. I hope you now understand that racism works both ways. It not only destroys the lives of its victims, but it also ruins those who uphold it." The officers said nothing. They already knew. This was the end of the line. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Journalists rushed to type out breaking headlines. Activists' smartphones aimed at the judge, the officers, and James. No one had expected such a twist. "Are you telling me," the prosecutor was still in shock, "that the defendant is a federal judge? Retired, but yes," James replied calmly, locking eyes with him. The officers exchanged glances. Lieutenant Brady turned red, his breathing unsteady. Officer Miller quickly lowered his gaze, realizing their careers had just gone up in flames. "Your Honor, we—" Brady tried to speak, but the judge raised a hand, demanding silence. "You arrested a respected man without verifying his identity, without any evidence, based solely on suspicion. This is a blatant violation of a citizen's rights." "But I'm not finished!" The judge slammed his gavel, silencing the room. He took a deep breath, then turned his stern gaze to the prosecutor. "Mr. Carter was detained based on a subjective assumption. No evidence, no proof, just he fit the description. Is this your idea of justice?" The courtroom buzzed with anger. "You knew this was racism!" a woman in the front row shouted. "You thought you could cover it up, but now you've been exposed," a man's voice called from the back. The judge banged his gavel again. "All charges against Mr. Carter are dropped. Furthermore, an official investigation into the conduct of these officers is now underway." Brady and Miller froze. "What?" Brady's voice wavered. "You are both suspended from duty," the judge added, "pending further review." The crowd erupted into applause. The officer stood motionless, fists clenched. They knew this was the end. The prosecutor swallowed nervously. "Your Honor, at least allow us to—" "No, at least, Mr. Collins." The judge cut him off sharply. "This case will set an example for the entire country. We will not allow justice to become a tool of bias." James Carter finally removed his handcuffs. He turned slowly toward the officers, his eyes cold but devoid of hatred. "You didn't know who I was," he said, his voice. The story spread like wildfire. By evening, footage from the trial was everywhere, on news channels, across social media, and on the front pages of major newspapers. White officers arrest black man without cause, but he turns out to be a federal judge. This headline dominated the media. Scandal and investigation. The next morning, Millbrook's chief of police, Thomas Grayson, held an emergency press conference. "We acknowledge that mistakes were made in this case. We are launching an internal investigation and will be reviewing our detainment procedures. Officers Brady and Miller have been temporarily suspended." "Do you admit that the arrest was racially motivated?" a reporter shouted. The chief hesitated. "We cannot comment until the investigation is complete." But it was too late. Outside the police station, a growing crowd began chanting, "Justice for James Carter! Police reform now!" Public pressure. Under mounting public pressure, the city's mayor issued a statement. "We will not allow bias to erode public trust in justice. This case must serve as a lesson for the entire system." Meanwhile, officers Brady and Miller became the focus of protests. Investigative journalists uncovered their histories of misconduct, revealing multiple complaints of excessive force. This wasn't their first offense.